Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all so much for joining us for our next Facilities Management Advisor webinar. We have a great session in store for you this afternoon entitled Facilities Maintenance as a Driver for Asset Sustainability. Today's session is sponsored by our friends from AssetWorks. If you wish to learn more about our session sponsor, you can hop on into the resource widget on your screen for more information. All right, everyone, and with that, my name is Michelle DiFrancesco from the Facilities Management Advisor, and I'm here to provide you with some housekeeping items and introductions before we start our presentation today. So the console that you're looking at right now does offer a few different application widgets that you can use during our presentation today. The most important widget on your screen is called the Media Player widget, and this should be sitting directly above the slide deck right now. This is where you can control the volume of today's presentation. Please do take note that there is no dial-in number for our attendees today, and the audio is streaming directly from your computer speakers, so please be sure they're turned up and on. You don't want to miss any part of today's program. However, if you do have to step away for any reason, or if you do miss any part of our presentation today, we are recording it, and we'll be sending out a copy of the recording to each of you via email in about 24 hours, so keep your eyes open for that. In the event that anyone on the line today runs into any technical difficulty, please feel free to let me know the issue that you're experiencing by hopping on into the Q&A widget on the left-hand side of your screen, and I'll be happy to assist you today. And we're really excited to hear from you today. We're going to be hosting a live Q&A session at the end of our presentation today, so I hope you all came with questions for our speaker. Please feel free to submit any questions that you have on today's topic at any point throughout our session today, and we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end of our presentation. And I know a few of you were really eager with those questions. We had a couple that were submitted prior to the event, so thank you so much for those as well. And again, anyone, if you have any questions today, please feel free to submit them using that Q&A widget, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of our presentation. All right, everyone, and with that, let's dive into introductions. I'm really excited to welcome our guest speaker, Doug Henstridge, to the floor. Doug is a senior industry consultant, and he is with AssetWorks. If you wish to learn more about our guest speaker, Doug, there's a little bit up on the slide right now, but we do also have his full speaker bio in the speaker bio widget on your screen. So if you wish to learn more about Doug, you can hop on in there. All right, Doug, and with that, I'm going to kick it over to you to get our session started. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, thank you, and welcome everyone. So I guess what we're gonna talk about today is my focus is going to be a little more on how we apply best practices around leveraging maintenance, driving asset sustainability. And I think what I'd like to, basically what I'll get started with is just talking about the goals. But I think it's more important to know that I'm sure a lot of you are aware that you have to maintain your assets, right? Otherwise they'll fall apart. And you have to present in a inviting place for people to work, people to come for recreation, to put your best foot forward. All of these things fall into place. So ultimately, when you ask why facility maintenance matters, it's because people need to use the facilities that are maintained, and they need to use them in a safe and inviting environment. And at the same token, you need to be able to manage the somewhat scarce resources that many of you, I'm sure, have in order to make that happen. So one of the things I want to talk through today is just kind of some thoughts on how to organize maintenance practice, how to think about how your maintenance practice should run, what types of things to be looking for, maybe looking for ways to start small and make simple improvements and grow from there. And I'll have a few examples of customers that I've worked with over the past couple decades where these things have gone well or gone not so well, which has driven improvement or the desire to change. And as Michelle said, please feel free to drop the questions into the chat as we go along, and we should have plenty of time at the end for Q&A. I'll try and keep my presentation to around 40-ish minutes, 40, 45. That should give us time to chat at the end. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. So when thinking about, like I said, when thinking about facility maintenance, we're really looking at a process that drives safety and compliance, drives efficiency, and really it's designed to protect assets, right? So you want to make sure that If you're operating a park, you want to make sure the playground equipment is safe for children to play on. If you're operating a recreational facility like an ice arena, you want to make sure that the environment is suitable for ice use, gameplay, for hockey, things like that. So these are the ultimate goals, right? At the same token, though, you have to be able to manage your resources, you have to be able to manage your staff, and you have to make sure that the equipment you're using meets its operational life expectancy as well, right? So there's that financial and that structural piece, as well as the front end piece of just being able to invite attendance, invite a safe work environment. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to focus on a little bit today is the public sector. I do note that there are several folks from the private sector, it looks like from the attendee list. Both groups have their unique challenges. Many of them are the same, though. So we'll look at that. But I think one of the big things I've encountered in working with public agencies is, and that's why it's top of the list, are budget constraints. The challenge is getting staffing, and not only getting staffing, but getting approval for additional staffing, finding staffing when you do get that approval, and maintaining staffing in the face of challenges with other external entities that may offer either a better or a more lucrative workplace environment. So keeping all of that in play, as well as looking at infrastructure that ages, right? One of the things I've noted with many especially local government, not also state government, is that infrastructure gets old. It ages. And as it ages, it becomes more costly to maintain, and it also becomes more costly to maintain regulatory compliance with this or safe operating environment. Side note: I have one customer I've worked with that still has a wood-fired boiler, and one of their main tasks, they have someone whose responsibility is to chop wood in order to run the boiler. That may not be super frequent, but that does still exist out there. So those are some of the things. The other thing to keep in mind is that in the public space, you're often subject to a high level of public scrutiny that may have their own sense on what you should be doing and what your facility should look like. So you have to deal with that, which will essentially interfere with your ability to do your routine maintenance activities, keep up with preventive maintenance when you're chasing after complaints and correct desires for corrections, which may or may not be a priority, but obviously when you're dealing with the public, it's going to be their priority. So these are challenges you're confronted with in trying to make sure your facilities are safe and have good longevity. So the other part I called out are best practices. What are best practices, right? So best practices are essentially proven ways of doing things that align with industry standards. These are often articulated as effective routine maintenance, adhering to, it could be industry standards, it could be manufacturer best practices for routine maintenance. We're looking at how we track and use materials, having effective materials management to make sure that when I have to do preventive maintenance, I have materials available to me at the time rather than having to delay, causing slippage in scheduling, making sure I have the resources available. I'm aligned with availability of the equipment being maintained, etc. Do I have to take things offline? Do I have to work after hours? So all of this flows into those best practice strategies in maintaining the operational environment. And the other part should be really a focus more on proactive or data-driven maintenance decision-making. So proactive, having effective maintenance schedules, documenting things, having accessible data and documentation. What I see a lot is organizations that still rely on Excel spreadsheets, Outlook calendars, paper clipboards, paper forms on clipboards, which yeah, you can document things that way, but there's not a lot of visibility into the results of the documentation. It becomes somewhat difficult to use. The other, so you have a technician who's performing a check, filling out a paper log sheet, attaching it to a clipboard, leaving it next to the piece of equipment. The asset manager for the organization, if he wants visibility in that, he has to go and look for the paper form, and then to try and find trends or look for predictions as to when a piece of equipment may be starting to fail. Now he has to piece it together off paper and might have to build yet another spreadsheet in order to track that out, rather than have this electronic and reportable. So that's kind of what we're looking at when we talk about data-driven decision making and data-driven approaches to life cycle management, is to be able to have data actually available. Click over the next one. Right. So one of the things we look at is when we talk, and I just alluded to that, when we talk about looking at asset longevity, is having effective preventive maintenance programs, having the ability to capture data in a usable, reusable, reportable way, right? But the other big piece is to have basically a culture of training and continuous improvement within an organization, so that your staff resources are effectively trained, have the right skill sets, you have the right people doing the right work, you have an alignment between staffing availability, staffing skills, and the work you're asking them to do, and then having documented procedures and protocols for actually executing the work. So these are all things that flow into the concept of best practices. The other piece is how technology comes into play here, not just technology for technology's sake, but thinking of effective strategies for using that. If I'm going to implement an enterprise asset management system, what do I plan on doing with it? How do I plan to effectively use it? If I'm going to bring in sensors or data collectors or some other tools, how is that going to integrate together? Or, how do I avoid creating silos of information that becomes hard to use? So these are things you want to consider as well as you build this. And then, as I mentioned, the final piece is this culture of continuous improvement. A lot of that flows from empowering staff to facilitate better decision making. So if you're assigning technicians to perform certain types of preventive maintenance, encourage them to think about what they're doing, think about the effectiveness of their workflow. Is the schedule correct? Are the checklists they're being asked to fill out appropriate to the asset they're working with? Are there better ways of doing it? Maybe they worked at a different organization and had a different way of doing it that might be applicable here. So I think by empowering staff to contribute, to provide feedback, to think through different ways of doing things, you build this culture that fosters this engagement and a higher level of accountability almost in making sure your assets are going to have longevity. In thinking about now the concept of continuous improvement, it kind of flows in a cycle, right? So as you go through this, you want to identify areas for improvement, you want to set objectives, and you want to define plans. Again, you can do this at a high level. You can also do it at a low level when I'm talking, about the hierarchy in the organization. But you may also want to consider doing this in a collaborative way, right? Feedback from the boots on the ground, so to speak, back to leadership to think about better ways of doing things. When you do that, you identify that, pilot it, right? Do it on a small scale, create a little pilot. And then when you run that pilot, monitor it, check it. Is in this case, maybe it's one building, maybe it's one type of asset we're looking at. Is it having an impact, right? Are we keeping up with our maintenance schedule? Are we seeing fewer faults and defects? Are we seeing a reducing volume of corrective maintenance just in that one area? And if you are being successful, act by standardizing some new procedures, expanding that across the organization, and then be prepared to start this next cycle. Again, we're going to look at this. This is working now, but as we start turning over equipment, we may need to do it yet again, because new equipment may need new standards, new procedures, new schedules. So this is a cycle we want to make sure we're in and we're following through. And again, as I mentioned before, this gives you the opportunity to look at empowering staff to become more engaged and take more ownership in processes and in the work they do and in the overall success of the organization. Okay. So let's talk through some of the benefits. Some of these I think will be a little more obvious. Obviously, you're looking at increasing the reliability and the longevity of your equipment, right? So effectively maintaining assets should lead to greater uptimes, reduced reactive repairs, reduced cost that goes along with reactive repairs. Ultimately, the cost of a repair is going to exceed the cost of routine or preventative maintenance. So you want to look at where you're investing those funds. It also is going to sap more of the time of your staff to have to fix things than to check things and inspect things. So these are things as well. But as you maintain the uptime, you maintain the reliability of a piece of equipment, it will last longer. One comparison I'll make here is the idea of think about your own personal environment. The heater in your home or the car you drive. You take it for regular maintenance. Your vehicle, you take it in for an oil change, tire rotation, multi-point inspection at some frequency, 4,000, 5,000 miles. And you do that to avoid excessive wear on your tires, excessive wear down of brake cylinders, of the risk of engine failures and other damage that might occur simply by doing these frequent checks. It's the same thing in any operational environment with facilities, equipment, these kind of things. You want to be out in front of it, right? You also need to comply with safety and regulatory requirements. You want to make sure you have a sustainable environment to work in. You want to make sure you have a high level of service quality to staff. If you're visiting a library, public library in the wintertime, you don't want to have to wear your coat and your stocking cap while you're perusing the bookshelves. You want to be in a building that the heating works correctly, that has the correct temperature, etc. So these are all things to take into place. One of the other things in thinking about best practices too is how you organize your asset information, right? So looking at standardized definition of assets, standardized grouping, which will then facilitate consistency in scheduling maintenance, building reports, tracking cost across your whole organization. If all of your air handling units are coded and classified appropriately, you can then start comparing unit to unit, cost to cost, facility to facility better, and to understand where you may have issues and not. So again, these are all things that come into play. When I talk about standard coding, there are a number of tools available in the industry, whether that be things like uniformat, master format, coding, that allow you to group assets that are common in common groups and then create common schedules, common reporting, etc. Okay. So as part of this, then we're diving into creating an overall maintenance strategy where you're looking at goals like maximizing asset lifespan. And you want to make sure you're gathering the data in order to track this, so that if you're looking at a piece of equipment that should have a 20-year lifespan, we want to make sure we reach that. If we're seeing a unit that maintains a certain level of operational effectiveness, you can definitely keep it longer. If it's not, you want to be able to identify and flag those that might be for early replacement candidates. So these are things here, but we also want to look at focusing on reliability and performance. We want to make sure we're tracking the optimal use of our resources, make sure we're monitoring safety and compliance. All of these things go into this strategy, both long-term, short-term, but all of these things go into the strategy and looking at what we're trying to accomplish. The other piece of this, and being with a software firm, I can't not talk about this, is we want to look at how we can leverage technology. Like I mentioned before, we don't want to just use technology for the sake of technology. We want to be able to leverage it in a way that it works together, right? So if we're using an EAM solution, or we're using a CMMS solution for maintenance work, preventive maintenance scheduling, if we can use IoT and various sensors, IoT being the Internet of Things, which is basically a network of sensors and devices, appliances, and equipment that all kind of are able to talk together and communicate with each other as well as with other tools. So then we want to be able to have that data not just siloed, but we want to be able to say, if we're capturing fault codes, or if we're capturing pressure readings, or if we're capturing fluid levels off of equipment through sensors or other data capture devices, we want to be able to feed that into our maintenance system. We want to be able to feed that in and look at fault codes, values to start looking at predictive maintenance. Are we seeing fluctuations in pressure readings or airflow? Are we seeing fluctuations in temperature and fluid levels that look to be anomalies, or are they trends? And being able to track that, right? So one of the early steps in this that I worked with a customer on was an organization that managed multiple ice arenas, and they had to do daily inspections of their ice making equipment, their glycol pumps and the compressors, et cetera. And they had been doing that on these 11 by 17 paper log forms, which is great that someone was looking at it and logging it. The problem was, when they were done, the log forms would go into a file folder into a filing cabinet and were essentially inaccessible. And over time, you get, each form had enough space for about 2 weeks worth of data with multiple checks a day. Over time, you would have binders of these things. So it was essentially not useful. By automating that, and they didn't do any automated sensors, they just started with a digital checklist, right? So instead of going and writing down a paper, they had a form they would fill in. But now they had the ability to report on it, and they can look at it. So looking at things like the operating parameters, operating temperatures, PSI readings, or just fluid levels was no longer just institutional knowledge or anecdotal, i.e., oh, that one drinks oil, so we have to pour a quart of oil in once a week. But they actually now have data, so they can start looking at this. They can start looking at trends, costs of that, and start either creating maintenance strategies for repairing or replacement strategy for a piece of equipment that is up there in years and is having problems on a regular basis. So increasing the visibility. And that's where a lot of this type of technology can be really helpful, is increasing the visibility to decision makers on whether we keep or, basically the replace, repair decision making around larger, more expensive assets that should have a longer lifespan. Okay, so, and then I have talked about this a couple times, and I'm going to bring it back again, because one of the key elements in this isn't, like I said, you can have the technology, you can have the equipment, but if you don't have a skilled workforce and a culture of collaboration and improvement and accountability, it can be very difficult to execute these plans. So one of the keys here is really to invest in training and development. And that means make sure you have regular training programs or enhanced skills, opportunities for internal mentoring, ability for staff to grow in the organization. You want to encourage continuous learning. So maybe you have one-off workshops, you have certification programs, you encourage the use of online training or outside of work training to staff. If you can reward that in some way, that's key as well. And also support cross training so that you can have people that are maybe skilled in one part of the facility operation kind of work with others, right? So not just learning about mechanical equipment, but also learning about electrical, or not just doing certain types of work, but looking for opportunities to get people more engaged, broaden skill sets there. You also want to make sure you have open communications. So you want to have transparency, you want to encourage feedback. And like I said, you want to encourage employee empowerment to make decisions or to drive changes in process, right? That includes things, basically actively listening, looking for ways to structure an operation or structure a procedure around how work really needs to be done, right? Based on that firsthand experience. Provide an ability to recognize good practices, reward good practices and good performance. Find ways to accomplish that. Definitely want to promote teamwork, right? Collaboration, sharing of information among peers. Maybe as a manager or leader, you want to definitely lead by example, right? Be the first to do these things. Encourage staff to communicate with you, but ultimately serve as a role model to the extent you can. And then, and all of this should lead to creating a positive work environment, a place that people like coming to work. That might include finding ways to socialize. I had one customer that would regularly have time to do little games or little events during the workday, even just to kind of bring people together, get people having a good time. It doesn't have to always be, but an hour here, an hour there, at the end of the day on a Friday, something like that. Just ways to kind of get people more together as they work. It does improve the overall workplace culture. Right. The other big piece, and I've addressed this too, is constantly looking for continuous improvement, right? No practice is perfect. They are practices that are better than others. So as you work through, as you build strategies, as you build maintenance plans, constantly keep an eye on them, right? Constantly be looking to track that, gather data, monitor metrics, set up KPIs to key performance indicators to track progress. Look for places where that maybe is slipping. Like I said, looking to gather data frequently, right? You want to, and I talked about this before, but by standardizing the way you organize information, whether that be activity codes, asset groupings, asset definitions, etc., you can build reporting, you can get better reporting that'll help you monitor overall performance. Are certain work groups doing better than others? Are certain types of assets performing better than others? Why is that? Start looking at that. Because just because one work group is maybe performing better than another, it may not be that they're not doing a good job. It may be that, maybe I have my resourcing levels or my staffing levels misaligned. Maybe this group needs another person, this group doesn't, and I can move people around a little bit and look for those opportunities. You want to make sure you're doing routine reviews. It could be a monthly, it could be a bi-monthly, a quarterly check-in on performance, on PM compliance. Are we meeting our goal of, say, achieving or completing preventive maintenance within 5 days of the due date, right? If we're not, why? Look at that. There may be underlying reasons for that. And it may just be an anomaly. Maybe one work group had a guy on vacation, they got a little behind, but they'll be caught up the next month. But these are things you want to look for, right? Are we seeing trends in not being able to get work done? Is it a resourcing issue? Is it some other problem? Maybe the schedule needs to be right sized or adjusted, right? So these are all things you should be looking at. And I'm going to talk about a couple examples here in a moment where this came up, but you want to always be looking for this. You always want to be looking for standardization, documentation, tracking, and adaptability, right? To be able to adapt and move forward. Okay. So one example I'd like to bring up, talk about a customer that I worked with. They had a process they thought was good, where they had about 400 PMs they were triggering every month. This is a public agency that was a bit geographically dispersed, multiple facilities scattered around a geographic area. They had a team that was stretched out over that. But what they found is that they had PM schedules in place. They knew what equipment needed to be routinely inspected, have routine maintenance on, filter changes, belt changes, cleaning, those kind of things. But they were only getting through about half of them every month, right? And the process they had was they would trigger all 400 of these PMs at the beginning of the month, and they were in the queue, and the guys would work them. But as they got through the month, they'd get through about half of them. The month came to an end. They would roll them over to the next month, and they would get through half of them again, oftentimes the same half. So some units were getting a monthly inspection. Some might be getting an inspection every other month or maybe once a quarter. Some got looked at maybe once a year. And so they were also then seeing an increase in basically reactive maintenance. Things were breaking down. Things were going offline at inconvenient times. And so this is what was going on frequently. So one of the things, as part of the implementation of a new EAM system, is they revisited their PM schedule. And they looked at this and they said, 400 is too many. How do we streamline this? So one of the things they looked at a couple of things. And it wasn't necessarily that staff wasn't doing their job, but they identified that their staff was kind of misaligned with the work that needed to be done. So they did a look and they better assigned their staff geographically. So they looked at having more dedicated responsibilities for parts of the organization that were geographically dispersed. Then they looked at their PMs and they said, do all of these, for example, a certain type of unit, these rooftop units, these air handling units, need to have the same PM on the same frequency, right? So do I need to, change the filters every month on all of them? Or can I look at it and say, well, the ones that are in our 24/7 operations, like the 911 center, the correctional facility, yeah, those need to be looked at monthly. They need to have the monthly inspection cycle. But those that were in buildings that were less frequently used, like public libraries, or their more administrative office space, where they were really open regular hours. They were open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 or 7 to 5, or they were open 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, like a library maybe. They didn't need to have the same schedule as the ones at the prison or the ones at the 911 center. So they looked at that and say, maybe we shift those to a bi-monthly. And maybe we also look at streamlining the checklist based on the equipment, and we can adjust those, because some of their checklists they realized were a bit old and had call outs in them that were for things that the equipment no longer required or had or used. So that we looked at that and tightened that up. And then they also adjusted to more of a weekly schedule. So they looked at, these are the things we want to do each week. These are the work teams that would be responsible for these. They set up automated assignments. And then they empowered their staff to be responsible for getting the work done in the time frame, and not so much telling them when they had to work. They did give the staff, though, some dedicated days each week to work only on preventive or routine maintenance. So they didn't have to chase corrective maintenance on those days. They could focus on that, and they notified their customers that, hey, we're adjusting how we're doing this, and we'll only be responding to corrective actions on certain days of the week as well, unless it's some kind of a life safety priority, right? And what they found was then staff would focus on the PMs. They would get their weeklies that would trigger, that reduced the amount they're working on each week, and the compliance with getting them done went up. They also found that by empowering them to know that, hey, on Mondays, maybe Mondays and Wednesdays are my PM only days, they would focus on them. But then on the other days of the week, if they were empowered to say, hey, if my corrective schedule is shorter, I can pull some of my PMs ahead in the week. If on Tuesday I have the afternoon open because I didn't get as many calls for, adjusting thermostats or leaky pipes in the restroom, I can go ahead and work on some of my Wednesday PMs on Tuesday, etc. So they worked on it that way, and they also, like I said, they also structured around availability of the asset. So when you're dealing with like a correctional facility, you have the challenge that some of the equipment that needs to be maintained is in the part of the prison that needs to be locked down in order for facility maintenance to go in. And that only happens at certain times of the day. So by scheduling that and blocking that time on the schedule, they knew which days they were going to be there versus other places, and they could better manage their work as well. So it all came down to just kind of revisit. Again, it was more of a procedural and a process, and building out a maintenance strategy or maintenance plan around what they had to do, who they had available to do it, where it was, and in some cases when it was available to perform work. And they found a much higher effectiveness in getting the work done throughout the week, right? So, and you couple that with the ability to get rid of paper-based forms and go into digital data collection forms. Like I said, we haven't even looked at any type of automated sensors yet. This is still somewhat manually collected data, but the volume of data they're getting is better. And it gives the asset managers the ability to have better data to start looking at life cycle, right? Because they're not only looking at the lifespan or the life cycle or asset degradation over time, but now they're also looking at indicators like, am I seeing an increased cost? Are we seeing defects found during inspections that require reactive maintenance as a follow-up? Are we capturing readings off of equipment that might be an indicator that it's trending towards a problem that we can get out in front of? And again, this becomes the ability to start looking at predicting failures and doing predictive maintenance, saying this piece of equipment looks like it may fail down the road. Let's go out and fix it before that happens, and avoid the big cost burden of having it go offline and having to do a major repair, but also to prevent a major repair causing damage to other parts of the piece of equipment, which encourages longevity. So that's one example where, again, just looking at current practice, looking at current configuration of a maintenance program actually benefited the long-term operation. And they were able to actually do more with the same staff, where originally they thought they were short-handed. So just better organization helped them significantly. The other one I wanted to talk through, and this one's a little different, but this was more about accountability and safety. So this is an organization that had a revenue generation aspect. They collected tolls, right? It was a tollway authority. They collected tolls. They had automated toll equipment. And in this case, they had backup generators that ensured that their toll collection systems stayed online if there was a power outage. And as it happened, there was a storm. Power went offline for several hours. In the case, I think it was about 3.5 hours, power went offline. The main backup generators did not turn on. Now, and they weren't able to get them to come online until the power came back. So they lost about 3-ish hours of toll revenue, which was a problem. So they found there, again, paper logs that weren't effectively filled out. It was a lack of accountability, and there was no way to document that until the failure happened. So when they went to look, they found the paper logs had been filled out, right? And they looked like they were filled out rigorously, that, yeah, we test ran the machine once a week, and we did this and this and this. But what they learned in sort of the after action report was that the log was filled out, but the work that the log was documenting wasn't done. And so these generators were effectively not test run at all. So the fact that they didn't turn on wasn't a surprise. And the fact that they required a significant repair in order to be operational again, resulted in a change in policy and practice, as well as a change in staffing. But in that case, they went to a more automated approach. Now, you still can't guarantee someone does their job, but at least they had better documentation, and they had reportability in the documentation. So the facility manager for that main building, that main facility, could see that these things were being done. And so there was sort of an ongoing documentation, accountability around this, and that did improve the process. Several years later, that same situation happened again. The generators actually worked like they were supposed to. So that's a case too, where you want to maintain an atmosphere. And this is really more about, again, when they replaced the individual doing that work, they kind of made him accountable. They also empowered him to make sure that he was structuring this program correctly, and he was responsible for it. He owned it. And that helped there, right? So this accountability, but also set up a situation where there was dedicated backup resources. There was some cross training. So if he were unavailable away, there was someone who knew they had to step in, and that someone was trained to step in, and they often collaborated and cross trained to make sure they were ready to do the work. So again, this was a case where they improved. And I know the slide talks about safety and safety compliance. The original example was a very similar case, but with a 911 center that went offline, and they were unable to take 911 calls for about an hour and a half. And you can probably think of the outcome to that, where you can't dispatch police, you can't dispatch fire, you can't dispatch ambulances. It didn't end well for a couple people. So that was a bigger problem. But it's the same type of situation where equipment that you need to rely on in an emergency failed, and it failed because it wasn't being effectively maintained, essentially. So that's something, and that's more, like I said, it's more than just having a maintenance schedule. It's having a culture that values doing that work. Okay. I know we're close to 45 minutes here, so I'm getting close to wrapping up. So we'll talk here really quick about, so I kind of alluded to this in those two little customer stories, but I think that the thing we want to always keep in the forefront is we want to look at the reliability and the longevity of our assets, our equipment, our facilities. We want to make sure we're reducing waste, we're effectively using energy. We want to have predictable costs, and we want to avoid major repairs that bring major costs, which then can impact our budget. In many cases, we have regulatory compliance. think of, I'm going to think, because I've been working with Parks and Rec recently, I think of playground. They have inspections that go to safety. There are rules around that safe operation. You also think of other types of assets that require regular inspections, like elevators, bridges, that have state certifications, state compliance, state requirements for these inspections that need to be done on a recurring, continuous basis. But more importantly, it also goes towards the trust of your community and your customers as they use these assets you maintain. You don't want to go to a public pool and see algae growing in the bottom. You don't want to get in an elevator at City Hall and have it stop and be stuck in there for half an hour. So these are things you want to make sure you're out in front of all the time. So from a next steps, things you can do internally, things you may look for external assistance with, but assess your assets. Look for those that, do a criticality assessment. Which ones are more critical than others? Which ones are more important than others, right? And which ones maybe have a different, will improve the sustainability of your operation. You want to make sure that we're effectively using technology and data, basically gathering data, using technology to gather data, being able to report on information, and training your people in these tools will be critical, right? And especially now, because more and more equipment is Wi-Fi enabled, is built-in sensors, built-in communications. Think about your own home. The smart fridge that tells you when your milk's going bad, right? These are things that even in the facility space are coming. The ability to have cooling units, heating units telling you when they're having problems. So these are things you definitely want to keep an eye on and look at. And then the last thing was that the value and the cost that you put into the development of routine or preventive maintenance inspection programs will drive future cost savings and the longevity of the assets you maintain, which helps minimize downstream bumps and higher costs and higher repair costs, et cetera. So that's kind of where I wanted to just wrap up and go into Q&A. And I know we have about 5 minutes, but yeah. And again, I apologize for not catching the Wi-Fi dropping sooner.
Yeah, not a problem, Doug. We're glad you're back, though. And yeah, as Doug mentioned, we do have about 5 minutes left here for some questions. So folks on the line, I know we had some questions submitted prior to the session. If anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to keep them coming. And a quick note, we do capture all of the questions. So if we don't get to your questions today, either someone from the AssetWorks team or our Facilities Management Advisor team will follow up with you to answer those questions. All right, so Doug, let's dive in here. We'll get through as many as we can in the next couple minutes. One of the questions that I'm seeing here is, what are the best tools and software to organize, track, predict asset expectancy, end of life, and PM maintenance?
That's a difficult one because I'm biased. But no, I think for the most part, it kind of depends on the organization, right? So obviously, I will plug our AssetWorks product, our EAM product, as a very solid tool for managing maintenance, organizing and tracking preventive maintenance, scheduling maintenance. We have replacement analysis. We have the ability to do performance tracking. There are other tools in the market that do similar things. I think the key is, and I seeing the customer list, I know some of the folks on the list are, in fact, our customers. But I think the key is whatever tool you actually end up implementing, make sure you maximize the use of it, right? And make sure you understand how the tools work so that you can effectively use them. Because what I've seen is in cases where, we go to an agency that had another tool and they got frustrated with it and they replaced it, is not so much because the tool was bad, but because they maybe didn't have it configured well, they weren't effectively trained and weren't using it maybe as well as they could have, and it was frustrating because they weren't getting out of it what they thought they would. So I think that's going to be the key, right? Is thinking about if we're bringing a new piece of a new software in, we also need to consider the fact that we need to rethink some of our workflows, some of our procedures, some of our practices. Because that's one of the things on the implementation side I hear is, well, we've always done it this way, so we have to keep doing it that way. And my first question is, well, why have you always done it that way? And what regulations or procedures say you have to do it that way? And it usually boils down to, well, it's because we've always done it that way, not because anyone documented that they had to. So those are the kind of barriers you do need to look at breaking down a little bit, regardless of whatever software product you use. But circling back, I would plug our own because, like I said, I'm biased in that regard.
You're allowed to be biased, Doug. Thank you for that response there. I know we're getting close here to the top of the hour, so we'll squeeze in one final question here, and then I'll give you some time at the end for final comments. So the next question that I'm seeing is, how is AI being integrated into asset management and equipment replacement strategies?
Right. So I think it's a bit of a work in progress. But the idea of AI, that's something that AssetWorks is investing in our software. Where I've seen it used is just being able to query or understand, what are, finding best practices, being able to do comparisons with other organizations. I'm here at a conference this week, and I was talking with someone, and they use an AI type tool. At the end of each year, they can track how many work orders did we create, how many preventive maintenance work orders did we create, what was our turnaround time on preventive maintenance, and then they have the ability to compare that across the industry nationwide to see where they fall in a percentile ranking, and they're able to use that to justify either more staffing or better equipment, or look at, hey, maybe we need to reach out to someone to talk about, do we need to make adjustments here? Other places, it might just, a lot of the sensor technology I talk to and some of the onboard device intelligence is AI driven. So it's actually kind of monitoring itself, sending out information that could be, fault codes, fail codes, fluid levels, pressure readings, all of that. So a lot of that has some AI technology built into it, that communication. But that's kind of where it's going. But I see this going down the path of, maybe even medium, not even long term, medium term, the ability for a maintenance tech to go on site, look at a piece of equipment that may not be looking right, take a maybe take a photograph or a sound recording of it with their phone, have an AI tool interpret that and generate a work order with the correct maintenance procedure to go with it, right? So you would essentially go out to a piece of equipment and say it's vibrating differently than normal, and your AI tool would basically trigger a work order and kind of tell you what you need to look at in order to deal with that vibration, for example. So, like I said, I don't even think that's long term anymore. I think we're looking at that in the medium term coming up.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Doug. I know we are hitting the top of the hour here, and unfortunately, we do have to close out of our session. But do you have any final comments that you want to leave the audience with before we finish up this afternoon?
Only I'd like to thank them for taking the time and appreciate the attendance. I hope it was useful for the folks that were here. And if there's any other questions, my contact information is on the screen. Feel free to reach out. Right. I'm happy to chat with you all if you want to reach out.
Wonderful, Doug. And thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us as well and for sharing your insights today. It was truly a fantastic presentation. And I know I took a lot away from it, and I'm sure our audience did as well. So thank you very much as well.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Yeah, huge thanks to each of you in the audience also for joining us this afternoon. And a special thanks to our session sponsor, AssetWorks, for helping make this event possible. Now, as I did mention in my introductions, we did record the entire presentation today, and a copy of the recording will be sent out in about 24 hours via email, so keep your eyes open for that. All right, everyone, thanks again for joining us today. Thanks to Doug, and a huge thanks to AssetWorks. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the afternoon, and we can't wait to see you on the next Facilities Management Advisor webinar soon. Have a great day, everyone.